Hello, I'm Mara Pearl, and this is Novel Conversations. This is part one of a fantastic conversation with two marvelous friends who are very accomplished authors, Judith Briles and Lee Murray. Judith and I are in the United States, and Lee is in New Zealand. So, first is my friend Judith. Judith and I have been through the great wars for a number of years as
Yeah.
authors.
Yes.
And we just still do wonderful events together, sometimes in person, sometimes on Zoom. And Judith has written over 40 books. She has founded Mile High Press, Author U, the Colorado Authors Hall of Fame, the Aspiring Authors Scholarship Program, and Publishing at Sea, and probably a few other things that are hiding under her incredible bio. So, but she also is a stand for fellow authors in a really extraordinary way. And that's
Hmm.
one of the reasons that I have paired Judith with Lee. Lee Murray is a most extraordinary person and author, a new friend from New Zealand and in New Zealand at this moment. And Lee also has written over 40 books, awarded her country's highest literary honor as a recipient of the New Zealand Order of Merit. She's listed as one of New Zealand's most inspiring people in The Listener. She's won numerous literary awards and is an honorary literary fellow of the New Zealand Society of Authors. So that's a short list for each of you, but now I'd like to ask each of you to brag a little and tell us about what you've done and what you're doing. Judith, you want to start?
Oh, what am I doing? Well, I just finished book number 48, and jumped into an area I didn't think I was going to do because I was being pushed by friends who said, when are you going to start sharing some of your recipes? So, and I'm a cook, but I'm a cook by you do a handful, handful. And you probably couldn't borrow a cup of sugar from my house, but you could borrow a cup of capers. With that said, so I have a new little book out, Cooking with Judith, but I think that it's best to say that I am a reluctant author. I never intended to write. I only knew that maybe it was maybe in my DNA because I got in trouble when I was in school because I passed notes all the time. But from that, my writing came from when a very well-known author and columnist here in the United States, where I had been at one time a president of two college foundations. And one of the perks we presidents would get was when they did these guest lecture series. And these celebs came in, I would get to have dinner with them. And it turned out that this person had three teenagers, and I had three teenagers, and mine were a tad older than his. Well, if you get two parents together that have 16s between them, there is always plenty to talk about.
I can
And
imagine.
yeah, and so we just started talking, and my son had gotten notice that he was draft eligible. And so I said, you know what we ought to do? Instead of the draft, we ought to take away their car licenses for 2 years. And we'd save on petrol and we would save on insurance. Who knows? And, we had this laundry list and we laughed about it. And I headed down to Mexico for a series of weeks' lectures that I had on my books. And I picked up a copy of the Los Angeles Times, and I'm going through it. And here is his column with all the ideas I had shared with him in his column underneath his name that he got paid for, and I didn't, nor did I get any recognition. And the epiphany that dropped in at that time was that, Judith, if you didn't start taking some of your own ideas, other people would continue to take them. So that's where the first book came from. I was teaching a class at a college on women and money. And I approached an editor of a local newspaper saying, hey, I don't know how to write a book. And he says, I don't know how to write a book. I'm a publisher of a newspaper. And he says, but you should talk to one of our novelists because he writes. So I contacted Phil. We got together, and in April of 1979, I hired him for 7,500 US dollars in 79, which is equivalent to $32,000 today, to teach me how to write a book. That was my first toe into the investment world of book writing. Nobody told me that books bred more books. Nobody told me that. And that's what those little buggers do is they keep creating. But it's, led to over 1 million copies sold, um, creating a business that's taken me to 20 countries to speak, every state in the United States. And now I get to show other authors how to do it. So I love that. So I think that's the biggest thing is the awakening, Mara and Lee. I think it's really important that a lot of people become, though they say at least the US, Lee, I don't know about your neck of the woods, that 80% of the population has a book in them, but are they going to get it out? And I always say, should it be allowed out? That's another question to address. Uh, but but
Good
maybe
question.
keep it in. But showing people how to do that and you go on the path and getting out there and how to rise above this cloud of over 2 million books that are coming out every year now. How do you start being different, distinguishing yourself? So that's, I love what I do, and I just would wish for everyone to find what they love to do and be able to stick with it a little bit. That's kind of my two bits. So, Mara, that's where I'll go from. That,
Okay.
my brag is I've sold 1 million books. I've made over $5 million worth of things, and that I never intended to be a writer. But I do know that the secret of writing is you just start writing. No matter how crappy it is, you just start writing and there's gems in there and you just keep working at it. And you must recognize that the best person to sell a book is the author. If you're going to sit back and wait for other people to do it for you, you're going to be lost in the dust.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Mhm.
So, Lee, please brag about yourself.
Oh, well, I can't brag about selling 5 million, making $5 million from my work. That's certainly not something I can do. Where did I start? Well, I think I always been a scribbler, always been a writer, ever since I was really little. In fact, but my dad was a big storyteller, so it was always about story with us at home. And I remember reading Gone with the Wind when I was about 12 or 13, and I came out, I just finished reading, and I was full of this story. And I said to my parents, "Oh, I think I'm going to be a writer when I grow up." And my parents said, "Oh, fantastic." And then that's a great idea. And they encouraged that. And then when it came to sort of making selections for university, they said to me, "Oh, honey, I don't know, that's very precarious. Making a living in the arts is really tough. And to be fair, it really is. It really is, especially coming from New Zealand. And so they kind of steered me towards the sciences. And so I went to university and did a couple of degrees in science and some management studies. And then I sort of was off on a different path. That's what happens, isn't it? You sort of lose sight of your dream and you end up on a different path. And so that I always wanted to write, and I'd still had journals and what have you going on, and did a lot of editing because when you do, scientists aren't always, they're very creative people and they're always very good at being clear. They're working in complex ideas, and so the articles and publications are often quite dense and difficult to pass. So I was doing a lot of editing as a scientist because getting those communications out in a way that is accessible to people is really important. And then, I had some children and we traveled around the world, and one of us needed to be at home with children, and particularly because both of my children have disabilities. And so it wasn't until I was kind of in my 40s, my late 40s, that my husband said, look, the kids are at school now, and they, there's a little bit of time freed up. And so just stop talking about this writing caper and just do it already, we can afford for you to have a go at it, and I'm happy to support that. And I think he hadn't read anything of mine, but he said, I think you can do it, and having that person in your corner that's willing to, to support you and your dream is so important. So, and that's not to say my parents didn't support it. They were just worried that I wouldn't, that if I failed, that would just be really difficult to sort of pick myself up again. So off I went, and I started out thinking, I thought, I should write what I know. And here I am, I'm a woman with children and family, and so I should write women's contemporary fiction because that's something I know, and I did. So I wrote this fun, what do you call it? Rom-com type story, sort of really light and breezy, which, I think I absolutely loved reading those. I thought, oh, great, I'll escapism, and I set it in my hometown here in Tauranga, and I was a marathon runner at the time, so it was all about running and reality TV and really sort of fun, wardrobe malfunctions and cupcake deprivation and that kind of thing. But and in writing it, I kind of learned that that's not what I wanted to write. I had super fun learning about how to write, and at the same time, I did some courses in novel writing here at the local university. But I just sort of realized that those were not the topics that I wanted to write about. I wanted to write about things that frightened me, things that concerned me. And that's not to say you can't do that in contemporary women's fiction. I just knew that wasn't the right place for me and sort of needed to step into the dark side. And so that brought me to speculative fiction, and sort of New Zealand stories are, sort of myth that incorporated myths. So I sort of really like stories that walk the intersection of culture and context, as I think is kind of how I would describe my work. I do a lot of work in speculative New Zealand, the New Zealand, sort of inspired by the New Zealand landscape, by our mythology, and these more recently, I am doing that, write what you know, and trying to put myself more in the story, because I think that creates a much more authentic story, and that lifts your work from good to great, without I don't mean that I'm a great writer, but it just means that you connect better with your readers when you're writing something that's important to them. So that's kind of where I've gone, and I've mostly gone I've done small press and medium-sized press and sort of traditional press. So I do a bit of a hybrid. Yes, I have some USA Today best-selling type labels, but nothing in the kind of level of what Judith is doing. But in terms of sort of hitting the spot for writing awards, definitely seem to have done that. I'm very lucky to have been acknowledged by the Commonwealth. Actually, I have a King's Honour I'm an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit. I have the Prime Minister's Award for achievement in literary achievement in fiction here down in New Zealand. So I managed to, and I'm a 5-time Bram Stoker Award winner. I have a lot of, particularly in some horror. Yes, so I'm New Zealand's only Shirley Jackson Award winner for psychological horror. So I've sort of found my niche kind of there. And I've sort of been at the sort of epicenter of Asian diaspora horror, particularly East Asian horror, and women's voices. And I'm doing a lot of work now too in writing mental illness in fiction and trying to sort of work towards narratives that are not stigmatizing, that still give us insight into characters with mental illness, but not in a way that demonizes them and makes them the villain and the serial killer that rushes around, murdering everyone, which is just not. So many of us live with mental illness in some way, and we're not all monsters. And so how do we write those narratives in a way which connect with people and help them understand those issues? So that's kind of where I come from. So I'm totally in awe of both you, Mara, and also of Judith, who are walking the walk. And I'm sort of I have a very small sort of niche, I think, and while I'm very pleased with the way it's going and how, you know, my little place in the world, and I'm comfortable with that, I wouldn't say I'm definitely not on the same level as either of you ladies. But I do work a lot with emerging writers. I'm a International Horror Writers Association Mentor of the Year. So a little bit like Judith, I work with the New Zealand Society of Authors, helping to mentor and assess new writers. And at the moment, I'm sort of this year, my community projects seem to be all around judging. So I'm judging the World Fantasy Awards at the moment, which is a huge task, like hundreds and hundreds of books. And I'm judging the New Zealand Poetry Society International Poetry Prize at the moment. So I'm really enjoying that. It's been fabulous. And I've got a poetry group, a couple of writing award judging gigs, and I've just done the Third Culture Film Festival short film festival judging. So I'm also a screenwriter. So I have a feature film that came out last year in the horror genre. So yeah, I'm a bit all over the place. Yes, I'm a bit all over the place, and possibly because it's 5 a.m. in the morning here and I'm not quite awake.
You're ready for your coffee. Lee, so your genre is primary horror. Is that it? What I'm hearing?
Mostly I write horror, but I don't write.
Wow.
So I think people's idea of horror, what is horror? They suddenly
Yeah.
think it's, you know, axe murderers and cabins in the woods, and there are no axe murderers in my writing, and no cabins in the woods. So I tend to write more realistic fiction and sort of use myth and you know, and legends and urban myth and those kinds of things, and step into magical realism, that kind of thing, but on the darker side. I like a little bit of body horror now and then. But yeah, I think horror is anything that unsettles or frightens us or concerns us. And so I have a very broad definition of what that is. And I think rather than just that sort of B pulp, you know, horror aesthetic, if you like.
So much of
Wow.
what you said, I resonate with so much. First of all, what you said about authentic. I've always found it interesting that the root for the word authentic is the same as the root for the word author.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole sense of lived experience, which all three of us are working with in our writing. Yes, there's plenty that's imaginative, but it's coming from a rich sense of insight into life. I also always wanted to write. When I was 5, I wrote my first novel. And I got my mother's help in binding it, you know, and I designed a cover. So I thought of myself as a published author when I was, you know, very, very young. At the same time, my journey took me into many years of performing. And so I inhabited characters and understood character development sort of from the inside, if you will, which certainly has always informed my fictional writing. And then transitioned. I then was a journalist and really learned how to research. And although I loved that career and I'm very grateful for those years, I knew I was a creative and had to get back to that. So now all those things, all those stops along the path are showing up in my writing. Sometimes I know it will, and sometimes it's a bit of a surprise, you know, which is fun. I'm going, oh, I can use that experience right here, you know, in this moment. So yeah, it's such an interesting journey. I mean, after 20 years, I'm an overnight success. as a novelist, right? And I certainly haven't sold as many books as Judith has. But I have several bestsellers and 75 book awards. And so there's just a sense of the community of authors on one hand and the community of readers on the other hand, and really profound connections, with both, which I so appreciate.
Mara, I love that you mentioned bestseller because people get stuck on what is a bestseller. And you have to be on the New York Times bestseller list to be a bestseller.
Just by some measurements, yes.
Yeah, and I
But
and I
that's
and
not
I'm
the only measurement.
it's not the only measurement. I mean, when I think of my book sales, over 90% do not come from bookstores.
Hmm. And
Um,
publishing has
um,
shifted so much.
yeah, and yet I have been able to raise a family and survive some unbelievable merry-go-rounds and roller coasters because I have sold outside the channels and not relied on $1 to $2 in a royalty for a book sale
From
where
traditional publishing. Yeah.
I get full price. Yeah. And so I think it's always interesting that my ego back in the early days was to be a New York Times bestseller. And when I finally realized I was selling more books than most New York Times bestsellers, it was a rude awakening to realize that I had more stretch, more influence, more help to my readers. And Lee, I started out as only a nonfiction writer. I just crossed over to writing fiction here in the last couple of years. So I was always a problem solver. Okay, what was the problem? What's the cause? What was the fix? Okay, I got the solution, people. It was so that's how my mentality was. But I am a recovered new traditional publishing snob. And I was a snob on that only legitimate authors were published via the big boys. Utter nonsense. Utter
Well,
Yeah.
nonsense.
that was the prejudice, and you still find pockets of that, but
Mhm. Mhm.
Oh,
many
you
of
do.
us have.
You do. And it's narrow-minded, isn't it? It's total. I
Yes.
mean, didn't Hemingway self-publish his work,
And
initially? I mean,
75. Yeah.
there's I think it is just very short-sighted. I mean, as a reader, you want to read what resonates, and you want to read what something that speaks to you and tells an entertaining story, and doesn't matter whether it comes from one of the big five publishers or you just happen to find it, in a local bookstore or at a festival or wherever. But I think also there's a misconception, isn't it, about what makes a bestseller. And I think, you can be on the New York Times best-selling list and you're a New York Times bestseller for 1 week. That's not the long tail of sales or it's 1 week and it's I don't know how many it is. What's the 3,000 books or something in a week? And but what about the long tail of that book and how does it sell over a life of the lifetime of the book, that kind of thing. And so really what you want is some longevity with the book and a deep readership. So you've got this band of readership that's loyal to those books and just loves what you're doing. So I think that it's very limiting to think only in success in terms of those kinds of those kinds of parameters. And when I get you when you look, I'm sure you girls will both agree that when you get a reader reach out to you and say, "Oh my God, this work changed my life, and it's the book that means so much to me because I could see whatever it was in the book that spoke to them," and that to me as powerful as any award or that, because
Yes.
you've reached people and you've made an emotional connection somewhere. And these kinds of conversations that we're having, when I can meet someone like Mara from the other side of the world, and she's invested in my country and telling a story around my country, and there's obviously these wonderful connections. All of my best friends are writers, like all of them. Um, I don't know how I would move from one day to the next, without these people in my life. So it's more what is success? That's such a difficult thing to define because it's so different for all of us. And I think if you just go into writing thinking I'm going to make money, that's
Oh,
such a small part of and
Yeah.
I mean, I
yeah.
know it's helpful if you want to buy the groceries and all the rest, but it is such a small part of the rewards that come from writing, isn't it?
I think
Oh, yeah.
as the advantage of being a writer is that you find out who you are. You process life mindfully, and you keep going through life with a series of aha moments. And those are so precious. And then when you get to share those, especially with fellow authors, then there's this intense sense of joy, belonging, and feeling found instead of feeling lost. So now all of us do quite a bit of mentoring. So although we are super busy as authors, I mean, I'm always on a deadline for the next book. I know both of you are too. And yet we take time to mentor,
Hmm.
and it becomes, a very big part of our careers. So
Hmm.
Lee, why do you spend as much time as you do away from your own writing in order to help other authors?
Look, I think it's my branding, which I didn't really realize. But I mean, I've learned everything that I've learned about writing. I've kind of done through exactly that. So, you start out with a piece of writing and you don't know how to make it better. So you share it with someone who's also writing, and they give their ideas and suggestions, and you reciprocate. And I think I learned so much from working with other people to help them lift their writing. And then I could say, oh, well, that's a great technique, and I should be doing that. And you apply it to your own writing. So there's so much to be learned from just sharing and critiquing other people's work. And so I think when I started out, I did a lot of that, doing some writing groups. In fact, I think right now I belong to maybe, I'm going to say about 20 international writing groups and
Oh,
national writing groups. And I'm a mentor for many, many of those, because I learned you never get out of a mentorship without learning something,
That's
what's
true.
fresh and a new way to tell a story as someone's perspective. And then there are, of course, the nuts and bolts of how to write a story and the things that the rules that you can break once you know them. Um, so I think for me, just that sharing and helping other people has been how I've helped my own work along. And so that's kind of been part of my branding. And then, of course, an anthology project, you bring all these people together on a shared vision and a shared community. Every anthology project is a community building project. And some of those have been charity projects in order towards a particular purpose or cause. So you are building this amazing network of people around you who share your vision for something or an idea or something to support and it just grows from there. And there's just and I remember when I won the International Mentorship Award, and I just thought, of all the things I've done, my dad died in the pandemic, and that was the year I won that award. And I just think that would be the thing that would make my dad the proudest, is the fact that
Yeah.
I'm known for supporting other people. And because that was, I think, my parents' work ethic. They were always on committees supporting, how do we encourage sport in young people. And they were on the church committees. And how can we support other people. And I think they were on the school committees, and they were always supporting the community. And when you do that, you find all these like-minded people who are interested in causes and things that are important. They're the things that make our life, that they're the place where we live.
Mm,
That's our community is the place where we live, and the people who are connected to us and share our views. And so, that kind of has been my branding. I just can't get away from it. And so that's why I almost always say yes to community projects. I'm terrible. And it's probably the reason I haven't put out a new novel in about 6 years, because I've just been so busy doing these other things, which I don't. Would I have had these awards, would have had this readership without the being involved in these community projects? Probably no. I think that has been, I would not have been the writer I am today, because it's helped me elevate my writing. But nor would I have the community that I have today and the readership that I have today without having done those projects. So accidentally, it's kind of been my branding.
that's
I
so
don't, yeah.
beautiful. Yeah, I mean, we start out to help other people, and inadvertently we are helping ourselves. Judith founded, I mentioned the Aspiring Authors Scholarship Program, and I work with her on that, and it is so much fun and so marvelous. Every other year, we invite people to submit samples of writing, and those who qualify, get a small scholarship, and then they get a mentoring program, which Judith and I run for the year. And how great and how fulfilling and exciting when we see authors who are so diligent and so ready to listen and learn and find their own path. I firmly believe if you get that tap on the shoulder that you're supposed to be a writer, then you likely should. But we want to encourage our people to really take it seriously. And in fact, part of your brand, Judith, is for authors who seriously want to succeed, because there's going to be a
Yes.
difference, and so
Yes.
talking
Yeah.
about a depth of awareness and
Yeah.
commit that, as you said, Lee, is beyond just getting in it for money, self-aggrandizement,
Yeah.
fame, whatever that might be, honestly not workable, particularly in the long term. So as you said, it's this long tail of creating a life, creating
Mm-hmm.
a career. So Judith, what would you say is your reason for spending, again, so much time away from your own writing?
Well, I'm always amused when people say you have to write every day. Well, I do write every day. The problem, I don't get to write for myself every day because I'm doing so much other writing that goes out. I The big thing about for me is words matter. Words matter. Words are so powerful. And it's easy to bury them. It's easy to be shouted out and everything. But you have to think that if words disappear, life can disappear, or the way we think of it. So I really always have wanted to encourage people if they've got an idea. I'm Mara knows me as I'm a book coach, and I work on the developmental editing side, and I am blunt, and I will say to an author, this is a great idea. I love your concepts. You're just a sucky writer. So we're either going to have to get you
I
or we're going
love
to
it.
have to rate out here.
In the nicest possible way. You're just a sucky writer. I love it.
I mean, writing does take skills to develop to get it out, or you need help. You need help. So I think the important thing for me in working with authors to encourage them to recognize where they fall down, how they can raise it up, who can we bring in to help support them, but how essential it is to go back to what I said, words matter. Your words do matter. Your voice does matter. How can we keep your voice in the play if we have to bring in some outside help? From whether it's quirky, which I like quirky, to, this deep, profound. side, how can that be maintained without someone else taking it over? So that's what I put some of my energy into. But I like to think of myself as an encourager, Mara,
Hmm.
to
Yes.
to to okay, if this is what you want to, go for it, but recognize that to become an author, and we need to all define what success is to us. We all have different definitions. And it could be money, it could be recognition, it could be people banging on your door to come to my book club or come speak or be on TV. Who knows? My podcast. That I think we need to define that, and then we have to look very closely. And that's one thing I like to work at is building their confidence, but also make them understand that this thing called authoring has a commitment to it. There's a commitment to it. And there's a time factor, there's an energy factor, and there is a money factor. That what do you financially need to invest in, whether it's the creation of the book, whether it's flying you from one event to another, or traveling across time, which is the time factor. And I don't think most authors really think about this in the very beginning. Am I in this to dabble? So Mara mentioned, my tagline is, that come to me if you want to be a seriously successful author. If you're a dabbler, go find somebody
Help
else.
you. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because I will get behind you and invest in. Mara just experienced one of my youngest authors I've ever worked with, Lee. He's 10 years old and he had a story to tell. And little Darius at 10 sold over 70 books over a few hours in a bookstore this weekend. That's
Fantastic.
what he did.
Fantastic.
You know, and his mother brought him to me and he said he has this idea. And I said, okay, tell me about your idea. And we talked about it. And then I just turned to mom. So I said, are you committed for the money to support it to get this idea there? Because I had to find out those components.
Mm.
Where's the time, the energy, the commitment? And she says, I will support this to do this. And I said, fine. So you're in the background now because it's just going to be me and Darius to work with him to bring out the book, and that's what we did. And over a 2 heavy month period, we got his book done, from his scribbly notes, from his hospital journey to all that, to bring it together so he could tell a story of a little 4-year-old who dreams of becoming an NBA player and a basketball player. And he's got the DNA to do that. He is known as a what do they call them? Extreme athletes already at his 10-year-old age. Is the growth is coming in, but he got a rare disease that mimics itself as cancer. So all of a sudden, bang, he's knocked down. So how he came out of it, and basketball became his medicine. So that's all I needed to hear to take and run, that I could help bring his story alive. So when I work with people and I want to encourage them, is I want to make sure that they've got the commitment and the passion, because I've told my authors that I work with, I don't want to care more for your book than you do. That's not that's not a good relationship for me. And I will cheer for you and support you and I'll shout you out and get you out there. But you've got to come to the party and commit to it too. So commitment is really important.
And on the other end of that age spectrum, I have worked with some authors who are in their 80s
Hmm.
who always, always wanted to write a book, but had assumed that it was too late and it could never happen. So
Hmm.
again, you have that serious sort of beginning interview about what are your goals, what is your time commitment. And so I've worked with a couple who have turned out to be phenomenal writers and experienced a level of that kind of interior success that they never imagined they could. And they really weren't in a position of needing to earn money at that point. It was more about that bucket list. It was more about that inner fire that they really had a
A
great
story
story.
to tell. Yeah, yeah.
And in one case, I helped this author publish his books. Then we did audiobooks. Then we did an audio drama, which won multiple awards. Then I introduced him to a screenwriter, and now it's going to film. And, this was his huge dream, and he had just suppressed it for years. So it's an honor, to be the coach in that kind of a situation where it's not my work, and it's not my victory, but I can open doors. And when somebody's ready and willing to go through those doors, it's just, it's so thrilling. Also, I wanted to share, I have a connection to Milford Haven, Wales, this wonderful small town on the west coast of Wales. And I named my BBC radio drama after that town because there's a geographical connection between the California Central Coast and the west coast of Wales. In fact, when you look at photographs of both regions, you really can't tell them apart. So I had a success with my BBC radio drama and inadvertently was helping that little town with tourism. So they invited me there years ago and honored me with a wonderful reception and a parade. I mean, it was like ridiculously amazing. Well, I never lost touch with them. And so a couple of years ago, my husband and I went back to Milford Haven, Wales, and I launched a literacy project in 5 schools in the Milford Haven region. And our students wrote a book about their own history. And I just will say, these were kids about sophomores in American school level. So that means they're mid-age teenagers. And they're at that point where they're bored, they're on social media most of the time, and they can't wait to get out of that town. They assume nothing good is going to happen in this stupid town. I have to get out of here. And now they're asked to research their own town, starting with ancient times of Celtic peoples and going forward through several historical periods. And when we launched their book, the comments that the students made was like, I'm proud of my town now. I understand how many people worked so hard over the years to create it. So of course we had the teachers and the parents and the leaders in the town just in tears. It was so transformational. And that just brings me back to what you said, Judith, about words matter. Mm-hmm. These children used words to understand themselves, their families, their context, their cultures. And I'm so excited about a project like that. I would love to do it in New Zealand. So maybe we'll do something, Lee. And
I think there's a place, for 10 years, I co-founded an organization called Young New Zealand Writers. And because the school curriculum is just so busy with so many other things that they don't have a lot of time for creative writing and expression. And lots of children have a story to tell, just as you say, Judith, that they do have burning stories that they want to tell. And also, they want to be informed readers as well. And there's an element of that. So we ran with my speculative fiction colleagues, we ran what was called Young New Zealand Writers, which was offering sort of first publishing and development opportunities for young people to see their work in print. So we ran full day writing conferences for young people. This is students from age 11 through to 16, 17. And every year we would run 2 writing competitions, and we would receive around about 1,000 entries for each of those competitions every year. And we provided individual feedback to every student. So they were free to enter, and then we selected the best ones and worked with those students to actually produce 2 anthologies every year. And a couple of years we did novel mentorship as well. I had 40 novels entered one year from students and the youngest was, I think, 11, and the eldest was 16. This is whole novel projects. And all of those novels were viable, which I think is an incredible feat for young people. Aside from sport and all the other things that are going on in their lives, to be able to sit down and work and complete a novel is just such a huge achievement for anyone, let alone a young person. And some of the people from that group, so for 10 years, it was a long time we were working with those students. Some of those students are now working writers. So they have grown up. So the early ones from over a decade ago are now grown that, 10 and 12-year-olds are in their 20s, and are now writing, and some of them have gone on to do incredible things. So it's so uplifting when you see people succeed at their dreams. There's nothing more rewarding than to have your mentees kind of surpass you, and you think, oh heck, I could never do that, and they write something absolutely incredible, and you think, oh wow, and it's not your writing, but you are so invested. I'm
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm not saying anything that
Yeah.
you two ladies don't understand. There is something even more rewarding than seeing your own work out there and published, to see someone be able to tell their story and have other people connect with it. It's just possibly the best thing. It is possibly the best thing in writing, I think. And how do you say, oh, I'm successful at that? That's just that's an internal thing, as you say, Mara, isn't it? It's that internal reward that you get for seeing those stories out in the world that might not have been told otherwise.
They had someone there to say, you can do it. You
Someone
can
Yes.
who
do it.
isn't their mother. I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah. I didn't know the extent to which the three of us had this
Mhm.
special mentoring thing,
Mhm.
especially with young writers. And so we're going to leave the world in good hands by doing this kind of project, which is very
Mhm.
important.
I love it. Yeah, hey, Mara, maybe we have some more work here to do.
Oh yeah,
I, I,
maybe.
I had a weird experience this weekend, and Mara, I don't know if you heard, Mara and I were in a bookstore, Lee, this past weekend. And one of this is 11-year-old, she's 11 now, and she bought one of my books, and she turned it into like a trailer for it. She made a movie out of the book. Mara, I
Isn't
didn't
that
show it to you.
marvelous? No, isn't that darling?
Oh, this was from the day before. So she came in with her lap with a tablet, and she showed it. She had her father act out one of the roles. Her
Oh, she
mother was
cast her
another.
family as they became the cast of the
She
movie.
cast
Fab.
the family. She
Oh,
scripted the dog
wonderful.
had to be the wolf, and that got got him
Oh,
wild.
my goodness.
And she's going
Fantastic.
through this, and I mean, it was a wonderful treat. So, for an author to have a young one come in that grabs your book. And this was a book, a historical fiction book, Lee. Um, and just take it and kind of run with it. It was just a hoot. I mean, I was overwhelmed when she kind of just showed up because she knew I was signing books in the store by her house.
Oh,
Yeah,
And
wonderful.
she said, "This is what I've done." So
So I
one
want
never
to,
knows.
no, you never know.